So week 2 training. This week we are going to focus on core principle number 3, which is emotional triggers. And already I can see that this is going to be a valuable training for you. So there is a bit of reading to do in your workbooks this week and also some exercises to get involved with. So make sure you schedule some time to get to be able to work through this week's training, because it's a really valuable one. So let's start by just talking about emotions. Emotions are nothing more than energy in our bodies created by chemical changes in our brain, and quite often they're like an alert to let us know that something is going on. But in true human form, what we like to do is we like to attach meaning to things, and this is done so automatically because we've done it for so long. We don't realise that we're doing it. So we get an energy in our body, we get a feeling, we experience an emotion. And before we know it, we've filtered it through our thoughts, our memories, our experiences, and we give that energy that we're feeling in our bodies a meaning. And it's from that meaning that we then create like a chain of events. And that's the first thing I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about the emotional chain of events, because when you can start to slow everything down and start to really see how certain things that trigger us lead to this steps, if you like. If you imagine them like links of a chain, something happens, we have a feeling, that feeling then creates a thought process, that thought process creates more feeling, and then what happens is we create what's called a negative emotional message. And I'll give an example of a trigger and how that feeds through the chain. So the trigger might be that you've had an argument with your partner. The thoughts you might be having is, why doesn't he ever listen to me? That's going to be creating some anger and some frustration. And the negative message that may be underpinning all of that is, why do people never listen to me? Why am I not important? That's a really powerful message. So what we start to see from this chain of events is little things can fire us off. And by the time we've passed it through our internal filter, we've got this really powerful message that we are hanging on to, associated with that trigger. And for those, this happens so automatically, we don't realise this chain of events is happening. So when we actually start to tie that into why we're snacking or why we're overeating, sorry, I've just dropped my notes. We can start to, we see the behaviour, we know when we're snacking, we know when we're overeating, but we don't always know what's leading up to it. So this work is really powerful and really, really important to be able to slow down and start to identify first those 3 key points of the chain of events. So the emotional trigger, the feelings that we get alongside that, and that negative emotional message, the belief system stuff that gets generated. And this stuff, like I say, it's such a familiar pattern for us. We don't realise that we are responding and reacting in that way. It can be a matter of seconds between trigger and reaction. And what I want to do with some of the work that we're going to do this week is help you to recognise the trigger, be able to press a pause and slow that whole process down to give yourself time to think and behave differently. So you're invited to have a little look at the emotional chain of events, and there's an exercise for you to do where I'm going to take you through a sequence of questions around triggers and what internal and external triggers you can think about and relate to at the moment. So we're going to do sort of like a bit of an awareness exercise to start with, getting you identifying different things in your life that are triggering you emotionally at the moment, external things like places and people, and internal things like memories and your own thoughts and stuff like that. So that's the first thing you're going to work through. I'm then going to invite you to actually choose 3 of them, maybe 3 that are really relevant for you at the moment, and to pass them through the chain of events. So you start to work through when that trigger triggers you, what are you thinking? And what is the emotional negative message that comes out the end of it? Because the more you start to understand that, the more you can understand why you're having these real strong emotional reactions to things that then kick off the snacking or the overeating. So this is a really important part of this journey for you to raise your awareness of emotional triggers and that emotional chain of events that often leads those triggers. So just checking my notes. So that's the first thing that I want you to do. The next bit is around challenging and interrupting those patterns, because that's really key to this. It's one thing having the awareness that they're happening, but secondly, we want to start interrupting those patterns. And I'm going to teach you something called an in the moment intervention. And it's a really simple technique that has 3 steps to it, but it's going, and again, these kinds of techniques, they have to be practiced. You know, if you do them once, that's not going to be you fixed. You have to get into the habit of using these things, and you're going to not use them more than you do use them. But there's 3 steps to the in the moment intervention. And the first one is pressing that pause button. It's such a powerful thing to do, that recognizing when your emotion or your feelings or your energy is shifted, and instead of ignoring it or suppressing it or acting out, learning to actually press a pause button, almost like an imaginary stop button that you've got in your head. And what we're trying to do is just create a moment between trigger and reaction to go trigger, pause, just breathe, just give yourself a little bit of time and space before engaging in these automatic thoughts, feelings and behaving cycles that we're so used to firing off. So the first step of the in the moment intervention is being able to press that pause button, and that takes time and that takes practice. The second stage is then to explore the evidence that's in front of you. This is very CBT based. If anyone's ever done any cognitive behaviour therapy, it's really about being able to balance our thinking out, but we need to be able to have pressed pause and start to slow everything down, so we can then start to just look at the evidence, and there's more guidance on how to do this in the workbook. And then the last bit is to actually allow yourself to feel what you're feeling. This is such a precious and priceless thing to be able to do. You know, we have been taught to ignore our feelings. You know, it starts in childhood, and it starts, you know, even when we're babies and we're crying, you know, and our mums are rocking us and sort of feeding us and saying, shh, there, don't cry. So we're very much taught not to cry. You know, I can remember as a kid, you know, my mum used that typical stop crying or I'll give you something to cry for. You know, I know now it was just something that she said, but I took that quite literally and sort of thought if I carried on crying, I'd get into trouble. So I would go to my bedroom and I would bite my pillow. And that over time, if you do that enough, if you suppress that enough, those emotions then get repressed, where you kind of don't even know that you're feeling them. And I talk a little bit about the 4 types of how we deal with emotions a bit later on in the training. So though the in the moment interventions are really powerful exercise, pressing pause, exploring the evidence that's coming up for you and learning to actually just feel what you're feeling. And yes, it's going to feel uncomfortable, but energy in your body lasts for about 90 seconds if you allow it to come and go. Whereas once we start going through the chain of events and attaching loads of thoughts and beliefs to that trigger, we make it so much bigger, and it becomes so much more difficult to then control this really over exaggerated emotion. So I invite you to have a go at the in the moment intervention wherever you can. And what's quite helpful sometimes is if you've had a lapse, if you've had an eating event or something's happened that you haven't dealt with particularly well, then use the in the moment intervention. Obviously the pressing pause isn't possible, but look at the evidence that look at the trigger, look what happened, look what were the thoughts, how did you react to it, how could you have dealt with it differently. You know, the more we think about this stuff, the more we are likely to then recognize it when it's happening. So this is really, really powerful stuff. So in terms of emotional triggers, we're looking at it very much from the giving you some techniques and stuff to move you forward, not so much around why we suppress our feelings. We're going to touch a little bit on that, but this training is more about giving you some really useful techniques that are going to help you when you are in that emotional state, to help you move away from some of the overeating and the snacking that you're doing. So that's the first part of the training, very much looking around triggers and the emotional chain of events, and then giving you a tool, the in the moment intervention, that will help you to start to recognize these patterns, press that pause button, and then kind of almost step away and just let yourself feel what you're feeling. The next part of the training is around expressing your feelings. Okay, so as much as we have these triggers going on, a big part of emotional disturbance, if you like, is that we don't, or we're not able to express how we're feeling, which often means they build up inside of us. And then when we do finally express, they come out in a very over dramatic or very accusationary way, or we're really angry. They come out with lots of emotion behind them. So what we're going to look at in this part of the training is we are going to look at ways in which we suppress, also why we suppress. So a little trip down memory lane to look at some of the reasons why we suppress. And a lot of that has its roots in fear that if we speak out, we'll say the wrong thing, or we'll upset people, or they'll get the hump, and it's, and that's going to feel almost worse than kind of suppressing what we're really feeling. So we're going to have a little look at why you suppress. And there's some questions there for you to read through and kind of just relate to some of the reasons why you might be suppressing what you're feeling or what you want to say at the moment. We're also going to explore your relationship with expressing emotions, because for so many of us, we don't express, not in an assertive and adult manner. We are either passive and a bit manipulative, so we might go quiet. Other people go more on the aggressive or indirect aggressive camp, where they get really cross or they are sarcastic. So if we are expressing, but we're expressing either in a manipulative way or an aggressive way, we are not likely to get our needs met. So we're going to kind of explore that stuff a little bit as well. And what else are we going to look at? Oh yeah, we're going to look at how suppressed emotions actually manifest in your life. And there's a little exercise for you to do. I talk about sort of 6 key ways in which they actually present in your life. And if you can relate to some of them, it's really, it'll be really helpful for you to sort of acknowledge that this is going on for you. But also what I want you to do over the coming week is spend a bit of time just exploring how you suppress your feelings. So coming up with situations where maybe you wish you'd said something but you didn't, and what was the impact of that. So this part of the training is at the moment just about raising awareness. We're not actually going to take any action, although sometimes awareness does actually lead to action. But in this part, I just want you to sort of just play about with the different ways in which we deal with our emotions, which are repression, suppression, expressing, and releasing. Releasing is a lovely thing. Anyone who meditates, you probably very much relate to ways in which we can release what we're feeling. Journaling is another great way of being able to just let go of and release what we're feeling. So this part of the training is very much around exploring your relationship to feelings, and so very much the suppression side of things, because if you imagine, food helps us to suppress, but the more we suppress, the more that kind of lowers our mood, can create anxiety and depression. So really important part of this training to be looking at. As always, your workbooks will be sent to you via email, but also popped in the group. There is a bit of a chunk of reading this week in there, as well as your exercises to do. But any questions, reach out, but also come and share your experiences in the group. So thank you.